thanks for each new day of toil. We kneel before thine altar, Lord, the children of Guyana's soil. Great is the task that thou hast given, thy will to show, thy truth to find, to teach ourselves that we are one in thy great universal mind. But not in vain we'll strive to build a new Guyana, great and free, a land of glory and of hope, a land of love and unity. O children of Guyana, rise up and sing with happy tears, and bless the land that gave you birth, and vow to serve her through the years. Bow down in thanks for each new day of toil. We kneel before thine altar, Lord, the children of Guyana's soil. Great is the task that thou hast given, thy will to show, thy truth to find, to teach ourselves that we are one in thy great universal mind. But not in vain we'll strive to build a new Guyana, great and free, a land of glory and of hope, a land of love and unity. O children of Guyana, rise up and sing with happy tears, and bless the land that gave you birth, and vow to serve her through the years.
Welcome to another edition of Voice of the Diaspora. PNCR executive member, parliamentarian, and prominent attorney at law, Roysdale Forde SC, sits down with Vod Tv to talk about the cost of living in Guyana, GPL blackouts, constitutional reform, the oil sector, and of course, his vision for the PNCR if he becomes leader at the upcoming PNCR Biannual Delegates Congress, tentatively set for August 31st. Roysdale Forde joins me now. Attorney at law, PNCR executive, parliamentarian, people's person, Roysdale Forde. Welcome to Voice of the Diaspora.
Good morning, Norman. Thank you for inviting me to your program. Good morning to your audience around the world.
So we are going to go straight into the program. I know we're pressed for time, and I want you to extrapolate as much as you can on the issues. Mr. Forde, you have been a politician for some time, and you have been a member of the PNCR, now an executive member of the PNCR. You're also a member of parliament, an opposition member of parliament. Guyana, many would say, has changed significantly in terms of the oil wealth, in terms of the richness of our resources, especially oil. But we see today, Mr. Ford, that though we have that wealth and though the country is being seen as one of the fastest growing economy in the world, people are suffering. The majority of Guyanese are hungry. People cannot afford basic foodstuff and so on. What is happening in your opinion?
Well, Norman, in relation to this very important issue, I believe that that is one of the most important issues affecting Guyanese in and out of the diaspora, which is the cost of living. Taken by itself, the cost of living is completely outside the capacity, the earning capacity, the salary range of almost every single Guyanese, who, particularly those who are public servants, the small Guyanese, the working class Guyanese. And even in terms of what we want to call the middle class, the rate of at which the prices are increasing, it's affecting the ability of families to maintain themselves, to take their children to school, to provide for them, to take care of health care, education. So this is a fundamental issue that the government has allowed to run out of control completely. I believe whilst this is happening at the same time, it's most unfortunate that we're facing a situation, as you pointed out correctly, where Guyana is a rapidly growing economy. We stated to be one of the fastest growing economies in the world. There's not a question of lack of resources or lack of monies, but this is a question about the fact that the PPP currently is engaging in a program which I believe deliberately is not capable of resolving the social issues, not capable of improving the economic conditions of people. I believe they're engaging in a deliberate plan to maintain and to divide the society more. So we're not having a situation where the resources, Norman, could adequately be distributed across the different sectors and people in Guyana.
Roysdale Forde here on Voice of the Diaspora, speaking about cost of living. We see that this cost of living also has affected our citizens in a way where some of our professionals in certain fields, teachers and nurses primarily, are leaving Guyana for other places to etch out a standard of living that they cannot get in Guyana under the PPP civic regime. Talk to us a bit about that. Teachers leaving, nurses leaving. Why?
Um, well, Norman, particularly the nurses and teachers leaving, we could use the most glaring example, which is the departure of nurses at a rapid rate. I believe from the commencement of this year, hundreds of nurses would have left Guyana, particularly traveling to the United Kingdom to take up employment there. I believe, Norman, as I would said before on another program, this is part of a deliberate plan by this government to ensure that they open up spaces, open up employment to bring persons into this country, bring them in who will they will expect to predominantly vote for them. So this is not simply an economic problem. It is an economic problem which is being driven by a certain political perspective in which they want to have persons who will ultimately vote for them. They want to open economic space, open economic employment for people who will ultimately vote for them. Because if they were supposed to provide a reasonable living wage, this is the issue, fundamentally a question of a living wage being provided. They believe that persons will become less reliant on them and more entitled to make rational political choices.
And so you said it's a political move, sort of political agenda by the PPP regime. It's not only because of an economic situation. Would you mind to expand on that? We know that the government wanted to bring in, or they have brought in about 500 Bangladeshi, was it nurses, to Guyana?
Yeah,
Why do you?
the reason why I'm saying that this is a political decision to engage in this sort of conditions in relation to the public service, particularly, is not a question of a lack of resources. Millions and billions of dollars are spent by this government. The last budget was for 1 point something trillion. It's not a lack of money. So the political leaders are making a political decision
Decision.
that they're not going to spend the resources of the state, of the country, the people's resources on them. Particularly, they're not going to put it into salaries and wages for persons who need an improvement in their lives. So they're making that choice. And as a natural consequence of that, Norman, as a natural consequence of that, workers and persons will be forced to move. People will make individual decisions which are in their best interest. The nurses who are traveling to England and other parts of the world, they're not doing it because they don't want to live in Guyana anymore, but they're incapable and they refuse to live in an economic circumstance which is not helping them, and they could certainly do better on the basis of their sacrifices and their qualification. So that is why I'm saying it is a political decision. The government can easily spend the money that is needed to improve the quality of life, to provide increased salaries and conditions of work.
The government can do that, but of course they are unwilling. They are unwilling. It's not that they're unable, but they are unwilling to do that. I want to
And
move. Go ahead, Roysdale.
yeah, I'm just in response to what you said just now, and having not done so, having not put in place the economic conditions, the fact that the workers leave, the fact that the nurses and teachers leave, there's a vacancy. And how do they fill the vacancies? They don't fill the vacancies by bringing persons first from the Caribbean. Um, they look to Bangladesh. They look to people that they believe will naturally vote for them. And I believe that this is part of a conscious decision. This is not nothing accidental happening.
It is to maintain power, in that way, and that is unacceptable. People have to suffer. The Guyanese citizens have to suffer for the government to fulfill its political agenda, to maintain power, to stay in power. And of course, we know that by next year, this government, the PBP civic government, will be out of office. It's so many blackouts. It has become like a joke now to people across the world. It has become so funny, though it is so very, very serious. GPL and the spate of blackouts in Guyana almost every hour. Without exaggeration, we understand that the country's plunged into darkness because of mismanagement by GPL. We understand that there is some amount of nepotism there. A minister of the PPP government, a prominent minister of the PPP government, would have got his brother the CEO job there, and it has gotten worse. It has gotten worse at GPL. Talk to us about the GPL situation, blackouts in Guyana, and that sort of nepotism existing in that situation.
Well, Norman, I'm aware of that. The country is aware of that. This is just another example of the gross mismanagement and incompetence that is taking place. You would know, obviously, Norman, that the government will try to blame APNU AFC to say that this is what is the consequence of APNU AFC's governance, that is all the blockout is because of that, of our party. But when you look at the track record between 2015 to 2019, we had, as a party and as a government, moved the process forward to improve electricity supply to the country. But since the return of the PPP, we have seen a rapid decline in the supply of stable electricity and power generation. This is notwithstanding the fact that they would have come to the National Assembly requesting millions and billions of dollars to fix this sector, and they have failed to do so. Just recently, I believe the president announced that he's bringing in some boat or ship to supply electricity to GPL. When many years ago, this is very similar to a proposal that was implemented or conceived by Mr. Corbyn to bring in barges to supply the power. I don't know if you recall that, Norman, but at the time the PPP said that this was an unacceptable way of fixing the problem. So they have essentially returned to that as a solution. But the difference is right now is that there is gross mismanagement in the sector. There is no improvement in the supply of electricity, and there's no rational plan that the government has presented so far. I saw something a few days ago saying that they're now relying on Cuba to supply them with electricity. But it's legendary and it's highly public that Cuba suffers major power problems, power outages for days at a time. I don't know what is the basis of turning to Cuba to supply and fix this problem.
But it's clear that once again the government is not even investing. I mean, they can train citizens. A number of other things that they can do to ensure that we as Guyanese capitalize on those sort of employment to build our own country to a larger extent. But of course, the ploy of the PPP is to win elections. And the question here, Roysdale, is because we have seen in our political history that whenever a government goes into office, whether it's the PPP or the APNU, there is a certain amount of latitude and power for them to exercise, almost completely during the course of their tenure without any real opposition that can change in parliament these decisions. Many believe that constitutional reform is needed, and it is because there hasn't been any real constitutional reform to effect and affect the way power is handled by government, that these things are allowed to happen. What is your view, Mr. Forde, on constitutional reform?
I believe that constitutional reform is of necessity in the country. I believe that the permutations that we would have made to the constitution over the years, as particularly from independence to now, even though the 1980 constitution is radically different, I believe that we have not yet dealt ultimately with the question of governance in this country, reflecting the ethnic diversities and what it means practically for people in terms of their feelings of marginalization, whether perceived or real, and the fact that in the current constitutional arrangement, any party that goes into government will virtually be allowed under the constitution to govern in a manner to the exclusion of the other parties or the other interests in the society. You would have seen repeatedly when backed up against the wall, Barajagio and the PPP will say civil society is not important. Civil society are not politicians. That runs against the very concept of what is a democracy and the multi-interest elements in it. I believe that in going forward, we need to look at this issue in terms of the nature of the governance at the central level. We need to review and implement and completely change, in my view, the issue in relation to local government. We need to empower the regions. We need to make the towns independent from control of central government. We need to ensure that we have a more robust determination of judicial issues, particularly constitutional issues. We need to remove the government's absolute control and dominance in appointing persons to constitutional reform commissions, other constitutional commissions and agencies. So we have a radical amount of work to do. I believe that if I was a member of the Constitutional Reform Commission, one of the areas that I would have focused on particularly would have been the devolution of power to the regions and to cities and similar bodies. This is an important issue. The government continues through the role of the regional executive officer to stymie and control these agencies, um, being a block and an obstacle between the delivery of service and the people who voting in the region. We need to break this system up and decentralize it.
We need to break the system up and decentralize it. Mr. Ford, if you were to become president, would you put constitutional reform genuinely put constitutional reform high on your government's agenda? Would you make it priority so that after when elections come around, that certain things would be in place in case your government loses, that the country does not lose in terms of how it benefits from constitutional reform?
Well, definitely, I would do so. You see, Norman, politicians tend to make um, short-term decisions in relation to the political interests. I believe that one of the problems that we face is that we don't make decisions as citizens first. We make decisions as politicians first. And politics is a dynamic process. Parties come in and out of power over a period, and you do not deal and resolve the issues, you seek to take advantage of what you perceive as weaknesses in the overarching constitutional architecture, but ultimately don't advance the people's interests, it don't advance the country, it don't resolve the underlying schisms and volcanic areas that could suddenly erupt in any society and bring great instability. And we continue to engage in a system where it is not working for the people of this country.
The system is not working for the people of this country. Mr. Ford, the wealth, the oil wealth, it appears to many, that wealth is not trickling down to the people. As we said earlier, we talked about the cost of living, and, we talk about teachers leaving and so on. That wealth seems not to be trickling down to the people. What is happening in the oil sector in Guyana? And how is the government manipulating that sector so that the citizens are not benefiting from the wealth?
Well, in relation to the oil sector, Norman, the first area that I would like to look at is the question of the governance of the sector and oversight of the sector. And we would understand and appreciate that in any sector, if there's insufficient oversight, it will result in what is happening here in this country now. The government has failed to put in place the Petroleum Commission. They have completely amended and damaged, completely repealed the Natural Resource Fund that was implemented before. The current act is radically a poorer act qualitatively and quantitatively than the one that existed before. The reason why I'm saying this is because under the previous act passed by the APNU AFC, it reflected Guyana in terms of a broad based commission and entity comprised of different elements in the society who would have been able to have an overview, a role, and a voice in the expenditure of the resources. The other thing too, there were clear restrictions on the use of funds and the rate at which these funds could have been taken out of the Natural Resource Fund. What we have now under this new act is a very liberal, open, limited oversight process restricted to a few persons, where the government is currently plundering and running through this fund, taking millions and billions and trillions of dollars out of it without us not being able to know where it's being spent. Comparatively, under the previous act, any withdrawal from it had to be disclosed to the public. It had to be known exactly what is being spent on. Those sort of safeguards and mechanisms no longer exist under the current regime. So we have to understand that at an oversight level and a regulatory level, we have no proper systems in place to address that. So it is in that sort of background that I want to move on to the second issue, which is the expenditure and the actual spending of the funds. We don't know what it is being spent on, as I said earlier, and there is clearly not being spent on the people, despite the rapid increases of the budget and the budgetary allocation. When you measure it against what the citizen is receiving, it is negligible and next to nothing. So we have a vast gap between what the citizens are entitled to and what they're receiving. And that transfer will never take place under this government. As we pointed out earlier, the commencement of our discussion, this is part of a deliberate political process. Trillions, billions of dollars passed by the National Assembly, and significant amounts being spent only on capital works. When you check to see who were the persons that are winning those contracts, they're PPP persons. So a significant, more than half of the total budget, I believe, or almost half, I must check it back, is being spent on capital works, which is restricted by virtue of its nature to a very limited group of persons who could even bid for such contracts. So this is a very unequal situation that is taking place. The resources are being allocated by virtue of the government being in the office to their people. So that goes back, Norman, to the fundamental issue as to how the society is structured. What is the constitutional arrangement that is governing? How could legally the opposition and other elements in the society restrict and have control over this fund? This fund is the most important fund. The oil wealth is the most important oil discovery in the world, and it's critical that the Guyanese people, whose it belongs to, really and truly benefit from these resources.
Roysdale Forde here. on Voice of the Diaspora. Are we going to the meat of this discourse? And before we get there, I just want to play this clip for our viewers, and then we move into the meat of the discussion, which is your intention to run for the leadership of the PNCR. Your intention to run for the leadership of the PNCR. So we will deal with that after this short.
Rise above the fray of petty and lawless politics and chart a course towards a brighter, more inclusive future for our party and all Guyanese. Together, we can rebuild the mighty PNCR and our nation, brick by brick, until we stand as a tall, permanent beacon of hope and possibility from generation to generation. I call on our members and supporters to come on this journey with me, to regroup, refocus, and rebuild as we work to make our party stronger than ever. Join me, please, as we work together to unite the PNCR and rally the coalition to victory in 2025. Thank you very much.
That was you at your press conference to declare to the country your intention to seek nomination at the PNCR Biannual Delegates Congress, tentatively scheduled for August of this year. Some are saying before August or on August the 31st. Mr. Forde, regroup, refocus, rebuild. There was emphasis on that when you would have declared to the nation your intention not only to become the leader of the PNCR, but to challenge for the presidency of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana come next year when national elections are held. Why did you decide to run? Why did you decide to run for the leadership of the PNCR?
My decision to consider myself as a potential candidate for the leadership of the party was made after a long period of consideration. Um, I decided that I should first examine what is being sought and asked for by the membership of the party. So I engaged in a number of meetings across the length and breadth of the country with the diaspora. And what came across to me, in my opinion, was a rapid descent and loss of hope among the party and its supporters. Um, and what seemed to be bothering them significantly is the rate at which this PPP government continued to run amok, as I would say, across the length and breadth of the country, continue to be aggressive against our supporters, against the interests of the people of this country, and there seemed to be no response, no effective response by the People's National Congress reform. Um, we say that we must match the response of the PPP, but we have not seen that happening over the years. Over the last 2 years, I believe that our party has not stood up to the PPP. We have not provided the sort of protection, guidance, and leadership that is necessary. I don't believe that over the last 2 years we would have provided our people with the sort of vision and roadmap to address, independently of the government, their economic challenges, their social challenges in their homes and their communities, which are very peculiar. Um, we have not sought to expand the party into its non-traditional basis. We have not been aggressive in going into the communities which traditionally support for the PPP. We have not gone into Indian communities sufficiently. We have not gone into Amerindian communities sufficiently. I believe that we are at a peculiar stage where we need to really engage in a self-assessment. Our participation in the local government election, I believe, could have been significantly better. The party did not participate in 279 local authority areas. The party never even entered the race in Letem, in a community that I believe inherently would support the candidacy of members of our party to run that municipality. So we were at a very significant juncture in our history where I believe we needed to engage in a thorough and honest assessment as to where we were. We have to decide whether we want to get into power, whether we want to remain in opposition, whether we want to put personality over people, whether we want to lead our people out of this condition. And I believe that what is required is a complete paradigm change. And that is why I felt that we needed to regroup, focus, and rebuild. We need to go back to the values of the party, which will remain eternal and continuous over time, but reassess them for the circumstances under which we live. You're not abandoning anything, but you're reinventing it, you're reimagining it in the context and the challenges of the time. I believe our founder leader, Mr. Forbes Burnham, would have required no less of us um, to reimagine his vision for our time. And I believe that that has been a significant gap in providing the sort of visionary leadership that the party so desperately needs at this time.
I want to ask you, you are a central executive member of the PNCR. And you would have elaborated here that certain things were not done, for whatever reason. I want you to expand, for the sake of the viewers. I mean, you are a member of the central executive. Of these issues that you've raised that the party could have dealt with, but did not, allow the PPP to run amok, on other things. Why is it that you believe that you were unable to cause that to happen as a central executive member of the party? Is it because of the leadership? What is happening? Because when the blame falls, it has to fall on everyone, unless there is a situation within the leadership. You are now moving to take leadership of the party, if given the chance, if nominated. It's clear that you have seen, that better can be done within that party. But the question is, why is better not being done? Why has better not been done over the 2 years or going to 3 years of this new leadership? What is happening? Be very frank and open with, our viewers.
Yeah, yes, Norman. I'm always very frank and open with the viewers. And I want to continue our conversation by saying that I am currently a member of the central executive of the party. I was co opted onto that executive body. And therefore, I am part of what I'm speaking about. My decision to run is not because I um, don't support the party. I support the party, but in the current dynamics, I believe that I'm equally culpable by being a member of that executive if I fail to provide an alternative pathway to the members. The central executive of the party, which is the decision making or is a decision making body of the party, is currently largely comprised of persons who would have been elected by the party at the last elections. I believe significantly almost all the leaders persons that he had on his slate comprised that body. So there is a sort of unity on positions and principles when matters come up. I believe significantly that has been happening over a period of time. Um, as a deliberative body, the meetings are very irregular in relation to the General Council, which is supposed to provide the party with a with an understanding of what is happening and to include the participation of members at the very base or the group of the party. That has not happened. We have not had the meetings as required by the constitution. The party constitution requires that those general council meetings be held once every quarter. It's public knowledge that it would have been held two times in 2 years. So internally, Norman, when I reflected on what is happening in the party, the lack of dynamism, the lack of energy, flowed also from the fact that the internal constitutional systems and the areas for accountability and to hold the leader and his leadership team wasn't working and functioning. The CEC itself, I believe, by virtue of that earlier unity that I pointed out, um, is part of the problem currently. We go to and look at what is happening at the General Council, which is supposed to hold the leader and the CC accountable. We've had highly irregular meetings. Sometimes the meetings are, you have to wonder whether these are in fact what the meetings that are actually taking place here. It's hard to imagine you would have had two in 2 years. We are about to get into the first quarter of another year, and none would have been held so far. We have to have unity. Everyone calls for unity, but unity is not solidarity without principle. Unity is not solidarity blindly. Unity is not solidarity in the face of malfunctions and breaches of the constitution, of the party's constitution. Because what is happening again, Norman, I want to point out to you in another way and
Yes.
to show you what is happening in the party and reasons why I felt that I had to step forward. I felt obligated and out of a sense of duty to do it. Um, we have at least 11 districts, we could call them, the 10 regions and NAR. The NAR district, they currently are in conflict with the leadership of the party. It's public knowledge. In Region 1, there have been no party internal elections as required by the Constitution. In Region 2, I believe similarly the same thing since 2018. In Region 9, an IMC was imposed on the region. We know what happened there. Shortly, the imposition of the IMC, the PPP invaded the party's office. Subsequently, the party even failed to enter the municipal race there. So we see the consequences of the sort of internal dynamism and reliance on the party as a way forward.
Do you think, Mr. Ford, as a central executive member of the PNCR, do you think that there has been during the life of this executive of the PNCR, do you believe that there was some amount of domination, some amount of alienation that would have caused yourself and others not to be a part of the process to ensure that what you have said there would have been dealt with in a more effective or most effective manner? Do you think that there were
Yes,
alienation, and why? Why?
I believe so, Norman. I believe so. But the reason why I mentioned these things over that I would have mentioned over the past 5 minutes is to point out what is happening in the party at an
Party?
organizational level. At an organizational level, I don't believe that any such organization can say that it's operating at its optimum. And one of the problems that we have, I believe, is the fact that certain ideas, certain outmoded approaches to issues, certain views have become embedded in certain minds that we need to make the party a different party at this stage. We need to make the party a party for this time. We need to make the party into a new organization, not abandoning its history, but repositioning it for the future and for the current times in which we live. And if we were supposed to engage in that process, we would be able to make the party function as a modern political entity.
Mr. Ford, Mr. Norton made the leader of the PNCR, who's also the leader of the opposition. He made a statement recently on a program, and he said that when he assumed leadership of the party, the factions, including the Harmon Granger faction, of which I think you are a part, he said that when he assumed leadership, he did not get the support. Though a promise was made for the party to become united under his leadership, he did not get the support from the factions. Is that true or is that false?
The first thing, Norman, is that I'm not a member of any faction. That is part of the underlying language of division, which does the party no good. Once you have a difference of opinion, it seems as if you have been categorized and boxed off. That is an unfortunate development which is becoming more and more crystallized in the party. I know personally, I can only speak for myself. When Mr. Norton was elected, I went to him, I met with him, I congratulated him, and I committed to work with him. Over the last 2 years, I have done significant work in the party as the Shadow Attorney General. I have consulted with him. We have had different views on a number of matters, but I believe that I have supported the party and I've supported the principles upon which the party stands.
You have supported the principles on which the parties stand. And so now you are making this bid. You're making this bid. You are an accomplished attorney. You're a brilliant legal mind, and of course, you're a thinker. Listening to you today, you have a great grasp of what is happening to the country, what needs to be done to bring about those changes, and so on. And so there is no question that you would be someone unqualified for the party leadership or even for the presidency of the country. If you were elected party leader in August, would you accept a consensus candidate to run for the presidency and you remain leader, or would you want to be the party leader and the presidential candidate? If you become leader and that situation arises, would you accept a consensus candidate, or would you place yourself and ask to be voted for as president?
No, no, Norman. I believe that it is not my place to place myself anywhere. And this is one of the new processes that I would like to see my party adopt. The leader is not a god. The leader is not a dictator. The leader is not the fountain of all knowledge in any political organization, and that must not exist in the PNC. Any decision that I make will be with consensus and will be the decision of the members. In dealing directly with the question of a presidential candidate, I harbor no independent political ambitions to the exclusion of the other members of this, in our party who are qualified. It would be silly and it would be divisive to think that I have only the right, by virtue of simply being elected the leader of the party, to be the presidential candidate. That is the sort of radical change that we need to infuse into the party. So I have proposed publicly, and even at the launch on the 28th of March, I've told the nation and I've told the party membership, because I want them to understand what is at stake. What is at stake is ensuring that we get into power. What is at stake is ensuring that we regroup, refocus, and rebuild on the basis of unity, consensus. So I'm going to propose, and I have proposed publicly. I have gotten some pushback from the leader of the party who said that I misspoke, but I don't agree with him. I believe that the issue of the presidential candidacy is an issue that must remain open. It must remain open for the party to decide. It does not have to be me. And we will put in place a fair and objective system to allow that person to emerge.
Wonderful. Many Guyanese who support those in our constituencies, they believe, from my understanding, feeling the pulse on the ground, they believe that if they elect a leader of the party, they repose confidence in that leader to go into the national elections. That is the person that they want. Is I think the situation in which the party, highest governing aspect of the party, would sit down and decide, like, you know what, the people voted for Roysdale to become leader, but the party now decides that David Granger is more suitable for the presidency. We see a situation where the current leader is saying that he wants to be the presidential candidate of the party. How do you juxtapose the two? How do you feel about how the people would feel if the party now decides?
I believe that you can have a system that is open and fair. This is nothing new for the party. This is probably the first time, potentially, a leader is saying this, who intends to remain as the leader of the party. We have had before a primary process where Mr. Granger emerged as the presidential candidate. That process, I believe, imbued the party with energy and strength and dynamism, and coming out of that open process in which the public was part of it. They were able to play a role, express their views, affect public opinion in and out of the party. Mr. Granger emerged as the presidential candidate. We were able to go into that elections and obtain a majority in parliament. We were then subsequently, on the basis of that same energy that existed both in the country and in the party, to take the leadership and the government of the country in 2015. So I believe that we could craft a process which recognizes the party's position, a primary process which is democratic, whilst at the same time incorporating the views and opinions of members of the public.
You said I have traveled to many communities, and I want to talk to you about your work on the ground to win the support of you know, persons in our different constituencies. You made a public statement saying, I've traveled to many communities across Guyana and met with party comrades and supporters of the coalition who are demanding an approach that not only holds the People's Progressive Party accountable, but also an approach that imbues hope in the hearts and minds of Guyanese throughout the length and breadth of Guyana. An approach that shows unity, strength, collectivism, integrity, and patriotism as we work together to build a strong future together. Those are not only words and an ideal for the party, but that can work for the governance of a country. It is a statement coming from someone who appears by his words to be presidential material. And so I don't want to grill you on it because you have said already that in terms of party democracy and in terms of other considerations that forge unity within the party, you will allow the party to decide on certain very important decision. And so I want to ask you about this collectivism and this unity, and I want you to briefly say to us about this. Why is it you're saying this? And many know that this is being said because there is a problem in the party. There is a problem in the party. There hasn't been unity. There hasn't been a sort of collective approach and everything that you would have mentioned there that you have in your vision to ensure happens. But do you think that the buck or the blame for the failure, so to speak, per se, of the party during its tenure has to do with the leader himself?
Norman, I would answer you directly. I would say yes. As in any organization, the failures and the successes ultimately rest with the person that is in charge. Um, I believe that it is insufficient to say to the public or to the party that um, four members or five members cause all of this unity in the party. I believe that it's not just a question of this unity. This unity is a manifestation of certain other underlying issues. Their approaches to management, the compliance with the constitution, the allowance of the organizations in the party to function independently without crowding out opinion, the ability to allow the regional conferences to take place. When I visited Region 2, for example, no party internal elections took place since 2018. The members there are turned off. That affects the party's performance at local government elections. It affects the party's ability to work in communities. People are turned off. So we need to go back to the Constitution, and I've been articulating that it must be a unity, it must be a process which is intra the Constitution. We'll be able to get over all our challenges if we approach it with a new scope, a new mind, a new approach to the issues.
And so your vision is to strengthen the PNCR, is to make it viable so that it can be effective in pushing back dictatorship in Guyana. Mr. Forde, before we conclude and you give your closing remarks, I want to say this, that I will be inviting all of those hopefuls who have not declared that they are running, but people have the perception that they intend to run, to this program. And that includes the leader. My personal views on my page are my personal views, and I have a right to that. But this program will operate differently in relation to how it gives information to the general public. And everyone who comes on this program during this PNCR leadership challenge will be treated with respect, will be asked hard and frank questions, and so on. What I say on my page, it is my opinion. But when it comes to this program, Mr. Norton, Amanza Walton Desir, Simona Brooms, all others who wish to run for the leadership will be treated the same way you are being treated on this program. I have not decided at a personal level as an activist who I will throw my support behind. But I definitely will throw my support behind someone, and there will be conditions. But I really want you to break down, regroup, refocus, and rebuild before you give your closing remarks.
Mark, regroup, refocus, and rebuild. I'll try to do it in a way that would mark out the territory and what it means.
Means.
We're dealing here with a situation where I believe that we have to make an assessment, as I said before, as to where the parties are. We need to regroup around the values of the party. We need to focus on winning an election. And in so doing, we need to change, abandon, and cut off the things that don't work for us. We need to go back into the communities. We need to build relationships with civil society, the churches, the labor movement. Those are critical elements of an alliance that will be able to move the party forward into government. We need to go back into our own communities, our own party groups, resolve the disputes that exist between them, the reasons why people are divided. And I believe that those three pillars, regroup, refocus, and rebuild, constitute the basis for a new and strengthened and emergent and dynamic PNCR party.
Roysdale Forde, SC, Member of Parliament of the PNCR, and also an accomplished attorney at law. There's no question to his brilliance. He is one of our prominent attorney at law, and there's no question to his brilliance, his intelligence, the depth in which he rationalizes and strategizes and so on. And those are qualities, the qualities that we need in Guyana at every level, political and otherwise. Mr. Forde, before your closing remarks, if you become leader of the PNCR, there's a short window, a short space of time from that leadership bid, not bid really, but from the time you would have been elected leader, sorry, to the national elections. How would you navigate? What would you do differently in confronting the People's Progressive Party in that short space of time and in mobilizing Guyanese across ethnic lines and across class? What would you do to achieve that feat? And
I believe, sorry.
go ahead.
Um, I believe that the first thing that we need to do, that the party need to do shortly after the elections, if I win, is to articulate a new policy that is based on inclusivity, respect for a diversity of opinion in and out of the party, and at an ethnic level in across the country. We believe to articulate a program that reflects social justice. We must allow the ordinary persons in society to understand that they have a role to play. We must meet with the business community, not stay away from them. Meet with them, confront them on the issues that we believe are important. We need to support the labor movement to articulate for new and better wages of conditions for people in the country. I believe on a principle of social justice, we'll be able to articulate a new policy and engage in some energy and some dynamism. At the same time, too, we need to actually spend time in the party resolving the issues. It's an external and an internal approach. And I believe that when we work in that way, we will be able to get out there and create the sort of impact that we have. We need to engage in new forms of messaging. Um, I don't want to get into details as to
Yeah.
what I envisage, but new forms of messaging. I believe also we need to engage and confront the government. So I believe that protests and acts of civil disobedience within the law, protests, supporting strikes that the unions may feel that are necessary to be called, um, speaking with the international community from a position of power, dealing with major investors in this country, articulating a position where it differs from the interests and the welfare of the Guyanese people, which has always been a fundamental position of the party, where the Guyana that we want is a Guyana that is driven by the people and their interests. We have had a long history as a political party of standing first in relation to what is in the best interest of Guyana. I believe recently we would have allowed other persons in society to take up that sort of role in dealing with issues that affect the Guyanese people, the allocation of its resources, and we need to put the People's National Congress where it deserves to be, not only in government, but at the center of all political, economic, and social discourses in this country.
I don't know if you just read my mind. I know you're a very deep thinker and you are, you are bright in the layman's term. But I was going to ask you that question, like, and then you just came up in terms of the methods that would be used. Many Guyanese felt that the leader of the PNCR did not want to confront the PPP at times when protest action would have been effective, that he refused to take those actions, and the PPP would have gotten away with a lot. A lot. You are saying to this program now, wow, you're saying to this program that other forms of actions, whatever is necessary, would be adopted if it were required for protests to happen against the PPP. You would, as a leader, engage in that.
Yes, definitely. And Norman, the reason why rebuilding the party is important because you have to go back to the communities. You have to get those persons on board. You have to settle your internal issues, and that has been one of the bugbears against the effectiveness of confronting the PPP. You have to settle your internal issues. You have to unite, get them all together, present to them a path forward that respects them, that includes everyone, and then you'll be able to go out into the streets and engage in that civil disobedience that is within the law, the sort of protest, the sort of aggressive response to many of the nastiness that is being done by the PPP.
If you were to, and we have just gone over the hour mark, so we are definitely wrapping up now. But if you were to become leader of the party, would you allow Mr. Norton space and latitude to continue as a member of the party? And if you become president, would you have him in your government?
As I said at the launch, Norman, on the 20th, it would be foolish for myself or any other person who emerges other than Mr. Norton, obviously, in the context of what we're discussing. It would be foolish for anyone to seek to exclude him, shut him out, or treat him with any disrespect. I have known Mr. Norton for an exceedingly long time. I have respect for him. I've always treated him with respect. He could never say once that I disrespected him. I always regard him as the leader. I give him the regard as any leader of the party would be entitled to. But we have fundamental differences in terms of how we see the party going. We have fundamental differences in how we must approach the issues. And these differences between us are not meant to be sources of disruption in the party. It's supposed to be sources of reflection, of consideration. And as I could go into my conclusion and wrap up now, Norma, there are a few things I
Yes.
want to ask the public and particularly the party members and its supporters. I want you to ask yourselves whether you are better off now than when you were at the time when Mr. Norton and his team assumed the leadership of the party. The reason why I'm asking this question, because I want this not to be a personality issue. This is not, as I said before, this is not about who you like more or who you think um, look better. This is not those issues. These are very important considerations. They affect your life, they affect your family, they affect your children, and potentially for generations to come. We are at the crossroad. Make no emotional decisions. Engage in a self-assessment. As I told comrades throughout the length and breadth of the country on different occasions in different ways, consider these processes leading to a report process. I'm asking for to be elected the leader of the party. Examine my track record as the shadow attorney general and minister of legal affairs. Examine my contribution, my work that I would have done over the years. Let that be the test upon which you determine what I can do and potentially do. Then examine the leadership of the party as a whole. Examine the leader of the party. Are you better off than you were 2 years ago? And then examine your own lives. Are you better off as a result of the leadership that we currently have in place? Have you had a better quality of life? Do you feel more comfortable? Do you feel more hopeful? Do you see that there's a vision existing of which you are a part, both at the national level and at the party level? And I am confident that when you engage in that sort of analysis, you will come to the conclusion, not because you like me, not because I'm a lawyer, but you will come to the objective conclusion that the current state of affairs are unacceptable. And in those circumstances, I then ask you to vote for me.
Roysdale Forde here on Voice of the Diaspora, talking about his intention to run for the leadership. We are wrapping up now, and so I will ask him for his closing remarks. Roysdale, do you consider yourself a grassroots person? Do you consider yourself as a lawyer and someone in the echelons of the Guyanese society? Would you be comfortable in saying that you will be down in the ghettos, you will leave an open door for the poor, for the ordinary, that you would be comfortable to work alongside them, with them, and for them? And
But well,
tie your closing remarks into that.
yes. What I said earlier was actually intended to be my closing remarks, but you've asked a very, you've asked a very important question, Norman. And Norman, the question of being grassroots, right, is not a question of your constant physical location. It is a spirituality. It's a deep understanding and awareness as to where people are, right? And the fact that I'm a lawyer today and people think that I'm a senior counsel and I somehow landed from the moon as a senior counsel. I have come from no such background. As I said a couple nights ago on your friend Mark Ben Scott's show, I come from an ordinary, simple Guyanese family where my family sacrificed, labored, saved, punished. We all did it together as any other African Guyanese family would do. Um, or any other family at that matter would do. So I don't come from no condition that makes me insensitive or remote from the conditions of our people. I go into the communities. I live among the people. I don't live in any fancy excluded community with high gates and fences. I live in a community where the ordinary people live among me. I relate to them. I go into communities across the country. So I am an ordinary Guyanese who happens simply to have been qualified as a lawyer, who has attained the rank in the legal profession as a senior counsel. But I am of and always will be of the ordinary people of this country.
Roysdale Forde, thank you very much for being here on Voice of the Diaspora. I wish you every luck in your endeavor. I hope you continue to believe that you can become what you want to become in the land of your birth. You are a decent person, you are an educated person, you are a Guyanese of caliber and social standing, you are a professional, and you have every right to seek whatever position, office, or leadership in that country. Thank you very much, Mr. Forde, for being here on Voice of the Diaspora.
rise above the fray of petty and lawless politics and chart a course towards a brighter, more inclusive future for our party and all Guyanese. Together, we can rebuild the mighty PNCR and our nation, brick by brick, until we stand as a tall, permanent beacon of hope and possibility from generation to generation. I call on our members and supporters to come on this journey with me, to regroup, refocus, and rebuild as we work to make our party stronger than ever. Join me, please, as we work together to unite the PNCR and rally the coalition to victory in 2025. Thank you.
Bow down in thanks for each new day of toil. We kneel before thine altar, Lord, the children